thieves breaking into an East Price Hill home.
Thursday evening, June 24th, 2021. East Price Hill, Ohio. Ken and Ellen Reed, beloved members of their community, and their kids are all out for the night.
Both cars were gone, and that's kind of unusual to have an empty driveway. I probably got back home about 9:15. I didn't even go into the house. I went straight back to the garage. I saw the dog in the window, and she just seemed to be acting a little different, but I didn't think much about it. Ellen got home just a few minutes after that, and she and the boys were inside.
That's when Ellen notices something odd.
It drives Ken crazy because I can come into a room and I can tell that something is in the wrong place. So I thought, the camera, it's normally plugs into has an internet plug thing to it, and it wasn't plugged in.
At first, Ellen thinks maybe one of their kids unplugged the camera, but something doesn't feel right.
She called me and said, somebody's been in our house.
Ellen tells Ken she thinks they've been robbed.
She said somebody was in here and somebody took things.
The couple immediately takes a look at the footage on their security cameras.
I looked on the app to find out who took that camera out of the wall. And that's when we saw the guy taking it off the wall.
It's shocking. They have multiple cameras, and what they reveal is two strangers invading their home.
They were only there for about 5 minutes. Our faithful dog, Granny Wendy, who was old and not the watchdog that she once was. She got up. That was the first thing we saw, movement in the front room.
She gets up and she goes towards the back of the house.
That's why we know they went to the back door. She wasn't barking, she was just following them, going, what are you doing?
The Reeds realize they must have left the back door unlocked. They know how the thieves got in, but who are they? The footage offers one important clue, a clear image of one of the intruders.
Does us a great favor of looking at the camera while he's removing it so that we can see him right on his face.
The suspect probably thought he was taking the footage, when actually all he did was take the camera. Criminals nowadays are fairly aware that there's a possibility that they're going to be recorded. Apparently, not all of them are aware that the video doesn't live in the camera, it lives in a remote location.
Whoever they are, it looks like these thieves are searching for anything they can turn into quick cash.
Picking up gift cards and looking through drawers. Their goal was certainly to find some things that they could turn quickly. There's a gaming system, a laptop computer, an iPad, those kinds of things.
But what really disturbs the Reeds is the blatant violation of privacy.
We saw the jewelry had been dumped out, and they were in our son's bedrooms and, rooting through things.
Definitely shocked, like, this doesn't happen.
The Reeds report the theft to the police, hoping the intruders will be caught.
I never thought that they would come back again.
Just one day after they are robbed, the Reeds get hit with more bad news.
Friday morning, my sister called and said, Dad isn't answering his phone. And I went and found my father dead on the floor at 89 years old. You can just imagine, processing a lot of things. Friday evening, we were gone for about 3 hours.
While they are out, Ellen gets a troubling message.
Ellen gets a note from a bank that says, someone's tried to use your credit card for $500. Is that you?
The Reeds have a bad feeling, so they rush home. And what they find is shocking. Their home has been broken into again.
They went into the garage and they got a crowbar and they pried open the basement door. So the alarm is going off. The dog is barking at them. But they're just ignoring all that. And this time there were 3 guys.
A lot of people overlook that the basement is a perfect way, in many cases, for burglars to gain access to your home.
But once again, the bandits don't seem to realize they've been caught on camera.
And they took 2 more of the cameras. But they didn't see the last one. So we got a picture of them.
And when the couple compares images from the 2 robberies, they're horrified. This is clearly the work of the very same band of thieves. And this time, they've come back to grab big-ticket items.
I have a music and video recording studio in the basement. And they got a monitor and an iPad and a MacBook Pro and a camera. A nice SLR camera.
The thieves also take a priceless family treasure.
They stole Ellen's purse. And her purse happened to be made of ties that her dad had worn. And he's gone now. So it was a one-of-a-kind special purse.
It's almost too much to comprehend. The couple can't believe they've been robbed a second time.
And boy, that was terrible. I guess I thought one and done sort of thing.
It's also scary. What if they had walked in on these burglars?
What if the Reeds come home during the burglary? What if these men are armed?
And that isn't the worst of it. Incredibly, on Tuesday, just 4 days after the first robbery, the couple realizes they've actually been robbed 3 different times.
We saw some slats in our privacy fence in the back behind the garage had been removed.
Inside the garage, Ken discovers that some of his power tools are missing. This is the only place in the house where there are no cameras, and he's convinced the robbers figured that out and came back for more.
No doubt it was the same guys, and they're being a little more cautious that time.
It's a brazen act, and it leaves the couple rattled.
It's fairly rare that burglars will return this many times.
It took us a long time to calm down that night because we're just, it was very unexpected.
It was a very dark week.
Adding to the couple's frustration, even after they report the 3rd theft, no detectives are assigned to help them.
It wasn't a high priority. It was just a relatively small theft and break-in. It just wasn't on their to-do list.
So Ken and Ellen decide to seek help elsewhere.
I had put a Facebook post, please pray for me. And the next day I got a friend request from somebody I didn't recognize, but it turned out to be the reporter from a local news station.
Bold thieves breaking into an East Price Hill home, not once, but 3 times in less than a week.
Once it goes public, the story instantly goes viral. And when the community learns that the Reeds have lost more than $10,000 in the triple robberies, they are angry because the Reeds are highly regarded in the area.
We started a house church. We try to be a place where the kids come to play. We have basketball in the backyard and a trampoline. Neighborhood kids come in and out.
Friends and neighbors rally to help the Reeds.
So friends heard about this, right? A guy gives me $500. These other friends start a GoFundMe fund for us.
And that raised, $12,000. It was pretty amazing.
And with all the spotlight on the story, police also pay attention, devoting more resources to tracking down the bold trio of thieves.
Detective who lives in our neighborhood came and was dusting prints and stuff like that.
Within weeks, police arrest one of the suspects. To the Reeds' shock, the 20-year-old, who is charged with burglary in the 2nd degree, turns out to be someone who had recently visited their home.
I remember some guys coming a few months ago, but they were strangers to us. And they just asked if they could jump on the trampoline. Came back a few days later, asked if they could play basketball.
The two other suspects have yet to be arrested, but when they are, they too will face tough penalties.
In this case, these burglars will face charges of burglary and theft, the theft being graded by the value of how much they took.
Ellen's treasured purse is never recovered, but they do get back some of the other stolen goods, including some that police recover from a pawn shop. The harrowing ordeal has forced the Reeds to make some changes.
I feel like we're a fortress now. Ken's put more cameras up. We've got one of those little ring doorbell things.
Still, the couple refuses to be bitter.
What we've been praying is that the hearts of these young men will change so that they want to do something different with their lives.
And there's one thing the robbers could never take: this couple's giving, loving nature.
We will still have kids in our yard jumping on the trampoline. We're not going to change because that's just who we are.
In Michigan, another terrifying crime sparks fears that the intruder will return. September 3rd, 2020.
It's almost 10 o'clock on a Thursday night in Detroit.
Gas station manager Nasser Ali is looking forward to the weekend after a long week. And that night, he leaves his store in the hands of his trusted cashier. At first, it's business as usual. But just before 10 p.m., a man holding an odd-looking box walks into the store.
A masked man walks in about 2 steps into the doorway and places a large box on the floor.
He bends over and then does something frightening. He has a lighter in his hand. Is this a bomb of some kind?
The cashier, who was busy with his phone at the time, was completely startled.
Whatever the man is trying to do, he fumbles at first. But then he sets the box ablaze and races out of the store.
The box explodes.
The explosion sends fireworks, rockets, and flares throughout the tiny store.
The cashier had no idea what this box was. He had no idea what was going on.
In fact, the cashier assumed that a bomb went off.
The stunned cashier ducks for cover behind the counter. He is terrified of what's coming next.
Does he have more fireworks outside in the car?
Will he be back? We just don't know.
The cashier calls his boss immediately.
Nasser is spending time with friends when he gets the frantic call.
So I answered the phone, and as soon as I picked up, he started screaming. He's like, Ali, there's a fire in the station. There's a fire in the station. He wants to leave. He asked me, what should I do? And I told him to call the cops.
Nasser checks the security footage from his phone.
As soon as I seen the video, I was scared because you can't see nothing in the store. It was all just fire.
What if that fire is not put out in time?
Well, I just pick up my keys and start driving there,
Nasser races to the gas station.
I was just like flying here on the freeway. I was watching it when I was on my way. I seen a lot of smoke, but I wasn't expecting a big fire,
He arrives within minutes, before the police can even get there, and finds his shaken employee outside.
He was sitting on the side of the building. He was scared. As soon as he opened the door, there was a lot of smoke coming out,
The two men quickly get to work.
We have a fire extinguisher. As soon as we came in, we tried to use them to stop the fire. And then the cops came over a minute or two after I came in. The cops, they have a couple of fire extinguishers too. Even the cops were scared. They were like, this is a gas station. You have to get away from it.
Luckily, the fire is put out, and the main damage is only to the ceiling.
The ceiling dropped. The ceiling lights, some of them fall down on top of the grocery and stuff like that.
The fact that the only thing that was damaged here was the ceiling tiles is somewhat of a miracle. If the sparks from the fireworks had gone out to the door and hit the pavement and there was gasoline on that pavement, it could have created a much larger explosion. The end result of this really could have been catastrophic.
The damage racks up to about $10,000. Nasser is grateful nobody was hurt, but he doesn't know why this man tried to light his store on fire, and he's afraid he might come back.
We don't know what else he's capable of.
The station can blow up, you know, because this is gas. Worst case scenario, he can kill somebody.
Nasser wonders if the fiery attack on his gas station was personal.
You know, I don't have no problem with anybody. If he comes to me, if he has a problem with one of my workers, I will solve it. I mean, I will do what I can.
As he tries to figure out who targeted him and why, Nasser studies the surveillance footage for clues.
I was actually trying to zoom in to see if I can know his face. I never seen him before.
We have no idea who this man is.
Police are also at a loss.
The detective, he said that guy has a mask on, so it was kind of hard to search for him.
In today's day and age, all bets are off because people walk around with masks everywhere, whether it's in a bank or a school or a store, anywhere.
Hoping someone will come forward with information, police release the video to the public.
To the media, on social media, to try to get whatever tips they can.
News outlets across Detroit repost it online.
For the investigation of criminal acts, the quick and real-time dissemination of video can be vital to gathering whatever evidence you can by, within seconds, disseminating it to thousands of people.
The video quickly goes viral.
Never knew until one of my brothers sent me the video. They're like, you know, what's going on? He's like, your station is posted all over.
Comments pour into social media, condemning the dangerous, senseless attack.
The vandal could have killed somebody.
But the only real clue police have is that it seems the suspect had a getaway car and that his crime was premeditated.
One of our customers, he was telling me that he ran outside and then his car was parked on the street.
To avoid anyone seeing his license plate or seeing what kind of car he was driving. It was very strategic and very calculated.
So he knows what he's doing. So he knows he's gonna put the fire and start running.
Even Detroit's green light program, meant to curb crime, did not deter this vandal.
Police departments, they come, they install like 5 cameras. They put green lights on top of the canopy. Most of the gas stations on the city, they have them. It keeps all the troublemakers, the drug dealers out of the, out of your station because they think this has been watching, from the police station.
But this suspect, who either didn't know or didn't care about the green lights, is still at large. If he is caught, he could face arson charges, which can carry a penalty up to 15 years in prison and fines of up to $30,000.
Arson is against the law. One of the things that can certainly add to the severity of the charges is the use of some kind of accelerant, or in this case, explosives, and that is fireworks. So the criminal consequences are significant.
Nasser would like to confront the man.
I would love to talk to him. I mean, why would you do something stupid like this, you know?
And even though fireworks are legal in Michigan, he definitely won't be selling any.
This is a gas station, so there's no way we can sell fireworks.
This is a Thanksgiving travel nightmare.
A dangerous road rage attack in Texas unfolding in real time.
Hey, chill out, bro. It's 2 days before Thanksgiving 2019. And 35 miles north of Houston, Texas, Interstate 59 is jammed with holiday travelers.
It was the rush hour traffic, very busy on the interstate.
Just before the Splendora exit, a young couple changes lanes. In the process, they accidentally cut off an SUV, and the driver has an immediate, angry reaction.
He starts to throw bottles. He's cursing, he's screaming. He stops even paying attention to the road.
The couple is in shock. Suddenly, they are smack in the middle of an ugly road rage situation. And even more frightening, they have a baby in the back seat.
One driver thinks that they've been wronged. The other driver is trying to figure out what the heck is going on, and I got to get my family away from this.
Alarmed, the couple dials 911.
Montgomery County 911, what is the location of your emergency?
Yes, ma'am. I am on 59, and there is a Tahoe stopping in front of me and throwing stuff out the window.
And now
they're speeding. And he just hit my car.
He's having a road rage accident.
Things quickly escalate.
He's trying to fight us and like hit us with his car and stuff.
Actually swerved over into his lane, clipped the right front passenger fender of the vehicle.
And I have it all on video.
The couple is so shaken, they start recording on their phone. But that only makes the driver even more furious.
Nobody likes to have a recording device shoved in their face when they're already aggravated and irritated.
When people are engaged in road rage, when they know they're being videotaped, that makes them even angrier and even more impulsive. So that actually escalated the situation. He's hanging out the window, he's swerving across the lanes. He's so focused on this driver who's taping him that he's putting everyone's life in danger.
Now, things are really heated.
The drivers are yelling back and forth.
Hey, chill out, bro. I got a kid. I got a kid. I have a kid. I have a baby.
This continues for several miles.
We have a baby in the car and they're yelling at us on the highway. Okay.
The 911 dispatcher pleads with the young couple to keep their family safe.
Can y'all stay in y'all's vehicle and not fight?
But then, things get downright scary.
This is insane. And he just hit a motorcycle. He just hit a motorcycle.
He just hit a guy on a motorcycle.
God, he knocked him off the bike.
Holy
what the?
I don't know that I stopped.
Oh
He wants to fight us.
Man,
He's trying to fight us. He just
I don't know if I stopped.
Right now, we're on the highway.
He just ran him over with being a road rage.
Oh, you're crazy.
He swerved across 2 lanes of the interstate and he clipped the motorcycle, which caused the rider of the motorcycle to hit the ground, flip.
Now, multiple panicked calls come into 911.
He's road rage. They just hit his motorcycle and knocked him over and over. Hey, man, listen to me. Calm down for me, okay?
A car and a motorcycle collision has just happened. He hit the damn bike, not looking, and hit him and fell, but they're all stopped here.
Both cars involved in the road rage pull over. But just when it looks like this situation might finally calm down, both drivers step out of their cars.
Now these drivers are out of their vehicles and they are face to face.
And that's when things take an even more frightening turn.
Give me the gun.
Here.
Someone has a gun.
That's a deadly mixture for a disastrous outcome.
For J.C. Burrows, disaster comes out of nowhere.
I was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
He's just riding his motorcycle home from work, looking forward to Thanksgiving.
I was about 2 miles from home, 10 minutes or less to walking in the door.
And then, As he approaches an exit, he's blindsided. Caught right in the middle of the road rage feud as the SUV slams into him.
I couldn't avoid it. If I would have seen it ahead of time, then I could have got away from it, but I didn't even know that was even going on because they were coming up behind me.
And after he's flipped onto the ground, JC is a crumpled mess.
When it threw me off, all I did was ball up in a ball and just rolled. When I hit the ground, I throwed my arms up to protect my face, and that's how I got all the road rash on my hands and my arms.
JC doesn't know what is happening, but he can tell that the driver who hit him is stressed.
All he kept saying was, I'm sorry, I didn't see you, I'm sorry.
With police on the way, JC calls his wife to let her know what's going on.
The fire department showed up, a bunch of cops. Then my wife showed up. When she walked up to me, she leaned over and tapped me on the head, saying, "You scratched the bike." I kind of laughed at her. She knew I was going to be all right then. It could have been way worse.
Luckily, JC is okay. But when police arrive, they find themselves in the midst of a tense situation.
Not only did you have the people that were involved in this road rage incident, you have family members that are right on scene. And so very quickly you go from 6 people to 10 people to 15 people to 20 people, and it's just adding to the chaos.
The 2 furious drivers who were involved in the road rage seem oblivious to anything but their own anger.
They were still going at each other. Neither one of them seemed like they were concerned with Mr. Burris, who was laying on the ground. We had to separate them.
Hey, back up. Back up.
Despite one of the drivers threatening to pull out a gun.
Give me the gun.
That fortunately never actually happens.
I think it was just kind of a scare tactic to try to get him to back off, but no shots were fired at anybody.
Still, the situation is clearly volatile. And when police try to talk to the drivers, they point the finger at each other. It's not until they look at the young couple's cell phone video
I do have the video of what happened right here.
that they're able to piece it all together.
That video right there is very incriminating.
The driver of the SUV, Armando Montez, is arrested.
Mr. Montez was placed in custody for assault with a deadly weapon, and he was also charged with child endangerment.
And as the video makes the news and goes viral, there's a shocking revelation. It turns out the young couple were not the only ones who had a child in the car.
The couple screaming they had a child in the car. Police say so did he.
Authorities say that Montez had his wife and 7-year-old child in the car with him at the time.
We had no idea that there was a 7-year-old child in Mr. Montez's vehicle until we actually had been there for several minutes trying to sort things out.
There were children in the back seats of each of those vehicles, 2 fathers facing off.
The young couple who recorded the road rage incident is not charged. But Montez is sentenced to 4 years in prison.
He was sentenced in July of 2021 for charges of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon.
JC, the motorcyclist who got caught up in it all, is lucky to be alive.
Splendora police say it is miraculous that the motorcyclist involved in this incident survived.
I had to have surgery done on my right hand, so I missed Thanksgiving. Then at Christmas time, I had to go back in because I got a bad infection. I could not use my hands at all, and I was in physical therapy for almost 4 months.
And he thinks the sentence Montez got is much too light.
I think he got off real easy with it, and it should have been a harsher charge.
This could have been far worse. He could have killed someone.
On social media, people are divided. Many say both drivers should have been punished. But JC says the most important lesson for all of us is to never allow road rage to get the best of you.
It's not worth it. You don't know this person's got family, and they're going home to family, and you could take all that away from them so quick.
We live in a crazy world where too many people do crazy things. and it's not worth it, especially when children are involved, and just too many things can go wrong.
In another part of Texas, when things get crazy at a gas station, an unexpected hero jumps into action.
Yeah, nice.
June 26th, 2015. Midlothian, Texas, just after 6 a.m. Firefighter Daniel Gaskey is heading to work at the Mansfield Fire Department. On the way, he makes a pit stop at a local gas station convenience store.
Every shift, I stop there in the morning and grab a couple snacks and, a drink. Typically, my window in this gas station is no more than 3 to 4 minutes.
As a regular, Daniel has become friendly with the store clerk.
It's just I got to know her from me stopping in.
Usually they make small talk and Daniel is out the door. But on this Friday morning, everything changes.
This guy decided to change it up a little bit. I was half asleep, so I didn't see this guy come in right there at the door. He walked in and I didn't even pay attention until he had his hand on me and moved me.
The man tries to shove Daniel out of his way. But why?
I was tense because someone's touching me that I don't know. And so I step back and look him up and down, who is this guy touching me? And I don't know what was going on in his mind.
And what this man does next is terrifying.
He pulls out the hunting knife. 6 to 7 inch hunting knife. I would say 2 to 2.5 inches thick and wide. It was big enough to be intimidating for sure.
Daniel is in shock. This is a robbery. And the knife-wielding man is demanding cash from the clerk.
He's telling her, hey, I don't want any trouble. I just want the money in the cash register.
This clerk is terrified. One minute she's chatting with, a really friendly customer, Daniel, who she knows very well. The next minute she's being threatened with a large knife.
But what this robber doesn't know is that the customer he pushed aside isn't just any customer. He's a firefighter, former high school athlete, and Marine who served in Iraq.
I don't like to think of myself as an overly intimidating guy, but I'm a pretty good sized guy. Most people, I think, would look at someone of my size and build and go, maybe I should hold off on this. I don't know who this guy is.
You've got to have a lot of audacity to shove past a man that large. And Daniel is a Marine, trained to have cat-like reflexes.
Also, being a Marine and being a fireman, he's there to protect everyone. It's instinct for him to do the right thing.
And now that he sees the store clerk is in trouble, Daniel isn't having it.
Instantly, I was like, okay, this guy already made a horrible decision by touching me, and now this girl's a friend of mine. So I need to fix this situation.
Daniel eyes the man carefully before making his move.
I take advantage of him not paying attention to me.
He's calculating. He's sizing this guy up, trying to figure out what's his best way to take this guy down. He makes note of which hand the weapon's in. Whatever move he's gonna do, he must maintain control of that hand.
And I go around his neck and I flip him over and take him to the ground.
As the frightened clerk watches helplessly, Daniel instructs her to call the police.
I yell at her to call 911.
911 is the location of the emergency. 9th Street, Midlothian, there's a robbery. Do you have a suspect? They got him on the ground. Please hurry.
With police now on the way, Daniel manages to keep both himself and the clerk out of immediate danger.
I was able to get the knife away from him and move it away out of his reach.
But this robber isn't giving up.
He started struggling with me. He was medium build, probably about 170 pounds and 5'8", so he's got meat on him. He could put up a fight.
Is the guy giving him a problem? He keeps saying to let him go, but that ain't gonna happen.
It seemed like he was trying to go for the knife still.
This is scary.
Daniel knows he has very little options. He uses his own body as a weapon to hold this man down, and that has a lot of risk involved. You don't know how desperate he is. You don't know if he has another weapon. You could get hurt, you could lose your life.
But Daniel has this robber firmly pinned to the ground. And because of his training, he's pretty confident he's got this.
Before the military, wrestling was a big sport of mine. Going from wrestling into the Marine Corps, where they teach you hand-to-hand combat and to force your enemy to move in positions that are uncomfortable for them while gaining the advantage and getting in a position that's comfortable for you. So for me, the best option was to get him to the ground as fast as possible.
Still, there's no sign of anyone showing up to help Daniel. And he's been holding this guy for more than 5 minutes.
That can seem like an eternity. This assailant can get a second wind, and maybe he starts to panic. He wants to fight because he knows that he's about to lose his freedom if he gets caught.
Do you see the officer pull the rough? I don't see anybody yet. They should be there any minute.
Where are the police? And how long can Daniel keep this angry robber at bay?
This is a dangerous situation.
As Daniel holds down the robber, it feels like it's taking forever for help to arrive. But he's determined not to let this man get away.
I would put pressure on his shoulder to where it felt like it was gonna pop out. And you do that to anybody and they're done. And I was like, okay, you understand, I got you tamed, you're done. You're not going anywhere. And he's like, yes, I understand.
This is why they say don't mess with Texas.
And finally, after almost 10 endless minutes, police do show up.
From my understanding, the police were actually sent to a different gas station of the same name down the road. I guess it auto sent them to the other one of the same name.
Police take the robber into custody and identify him as 19-year-old Dylan Bearden.
He was surprisingly a pretty respectful guy there towards the end. You know, he was saying yes sir, no sir to the police officers. To me, you know, had no intention of fighting back or running after the police got there.
Bearden is charged with aggravated robbery. And everyone is grateful Daniel was there.
They said, thank you, good job. Found out I was a Marine. Oh, okay, well, that makes sense. You Marines are crazy. You know, in a funny way, joking manner. And it figures it'd be a Marine that would jump on a guy with a knife.
After talking to police, Daniel heads straight to work, just as he'd been planning to do when he first walked into the store. And he modestly shrugs off what he did.
It ended as amazingly as it could. There's so many what ifs, what could have happened. What I do know is I thank God that I was there. I thank God that I was able to help that woman and help in that situation.
But everyone else knows he saved the day.
It's very possible that not only would these people have been robbed in this convenience store, but it's very possible that the workers could have been harmed or even killed.
And when police released the security footage to the media, he's hailed as a hero.
It only took a few seconds to decide he was going to stop the robber who just brushed past him with a knife in a Midlothian convenience store.
And a 19-year-old shoved past him and held on a hunting knife about 5 inches long to the cashier. Gasky then managed to hold the man down until police arrived.
It's going all over the news everywhere. People are seeing it and they're loving it. He's a Marine, he's a fireman, and he stops this horrible crime. And he pretty much saves this young clerk's life by his actions.
People were commenting on how he was a hero. People even offered to take him out to dinner.
But Daniel still downplays the whole ordeal.
I'm not anything special. I'm a guy who wrestled in high school and served my country, and now I serve my community. What I am is a guy who knows that I'm gonna help someone in trouble. You know, that's the bottom line.
Daniel has to protect and serve. It is what he's done from the very beginning as a Marine. It's what he does every day as a firefighter. So this is ingrained in his character. It's hard to separate that, even if your life is on the line.
And now, Daniel's only hope is that his story can give a positive message to others.
Hopefully it inspired some people to pay more attention to help each other out. The tenacity of a good citizen and good Samaritan is undeniable.
At 2:17 a.m., the desert air outside Lubbock, Texas, was still. No sirens, no wind, just the low hum of highway lights buzzing like tired insects. A patrol officer would later say the silence felt wrong, the kind that presses against your ears, the kind that makes you slow down without knowing why. That was the night everything stopped moving, and at the same time began to rot. 19 years later, they would call it a cold case. 19 years later, they would say it was cracked. But on that night in 2005, there was no headline yet. Only a body. Only questions. Only the first breath of something that would never fully die. The scene was found just off County Road 114, a stretch of asphalt most people drove without remembering. The victim's car sat crooked, driver's door open, headlights still on, cutting pale tunnels into the dark. The engine was cold. The radio was playing static. And in the dirt beside the car, half-lit, half-swallowed by shadow, lay the body of a woman who hadn't made it home. Her name was later released, but in those first hours, she was just the victim, a phrase that drained the warmth from her existence. Mid-30s, local. No obvious signs of robbery. Purse inside the vehicle. Keys missing. Shoes still on. A single smear of blood on the door frame, as if she tried to pull herself back into the car and failed. Word traveled fast through a town that liked to believe it was quiet. By sunrise, neighbors were standing at the ends of their driveways, arms folded, voices low. A woman missing overnight had become a crime scene before breakfast. Parents kept their kids inside. Gas station clerks glanced up every time the door chimed. The community felt it immediately, that sharp, electric fear that arrives when violence doesn't look random anymore. This wasn't a burglary gone wrong. This wasn't some faceless drifter passing through. This felt close. Too close. Detectives moved in with the confidence of men who believed the truth was still warm. They photographed tire marks, bagged cigarette butts, measured footprints that led nowhere. The medical examiner's preliminary report raised more questions than it answered. Cause of death. Inconclusive pending autopsy. Time of death. A window, not a moment. No clear defensive wounds. No weapon recovered. The absence of clarity was the first real clue, and it was a dangerous one. Crimes that leave nothing behind have a way of swallowing time. They started where they always start. Family, friends, co-workers. The last known movements of the victim were mapped like a fragile constellation. She'd left work around 10:40 p.m. She'd stopped at a convenience store, confirmed by grainy security footage where her face appeared for exactly 6 seconds. Blurred, unremarkable, alive. She'd made a phone call at 11:02 p.m. The call lasted less than a minute. The recipient said it was nothing important, just checking in, just a normal night. Normal became the most suspicious word in the investigation. Rumors arrived before evidence. Someone said they heard screaming near the road. Someone else said they saw a truck parked there earlier in the evening. A former boyfriend's name surfaced, then sank under alibis that didn't quite convince but couldn't be broken. A coworker failed a polygraph, then passed another. Polygraphs, the detectives knew, were theater more than science, but the town didn't care. The failed test became a story of its own, passed from kitchen to kitchen like a warning. Weeks passed, then months. The heat of the Texas summer baked the last usable traces out of the soil. Leads dried up. Evidence was boxed, labeled, shelved. The case lost its urgency in the way all unsolved cases do. Not suddenly, but quietly, as newer crimes demanded attention. The victim's family kept calling. Detectives kept answering with less and less to say. We're still working it. No new developments. We haven't forgotten. Each phrase landed heavier than the last. By the time the first anniversary came around, the words cold case began to appear in local papers, usually buried below the fold. The community learned how to live around the absence. Memorials faded. Billboards came down. But the road stayed the same, and people still slowed down when they passed it, as if the ground itself remembered. Investigators rotated out. New detectives skimmed old files, their fingers tracing the edges of photographs taken by men who had already retired. The past felt sealed, preserved in manila folders and evidence lockers that hummed softly in the dark. Then there were the strange details, the ones that never fit but never went away. The missing keys, never recovered. The fact that the car hadn't been ransacked. The phone call that ended too quickly. A witness who came forward years later claiming they'd seen someone arguing with the victim near her car, then recanted, then disappeared. A partial fingerprint lifted from the inside of the door, too smeared to match anyone in the system at the time. Too incomplete to exclude, too incomplete to trust. It sat in the database like a ghost. Time did what it always does. It softened memories, changed faces, moved people out of state. Some of the original witnesses died. Some forgot. Some decided they'd never really seen anything at all. The case became a story told in the past tense, even though it had never ended. Every few years, a reporter would revisit it, dusting off the same quotes, the same black and white photos. Still unsolved. No arrests. A mystery that haunts the town. The language stayed dramatic, but the urgency was gone. The danger of cold cases isn't just that they're unsolved. It's that they become familiar. Inside the department, the file gathered annotations like scars. New theories scribbled in margins. Old theories crossed out. A task force was proposed, then quietly abandoned. Budget constraints, staffing issues, priorities. The truth was simpler and harder to admit. There was nothing new to chase. The case had stalled in a dead zone between certainty and speculation, where careers go to slow down. Until it didn't. In late 2023, a routine audit of evidence storage turned up something that shouldn't have been there. Or rather, something that should have been looked at differently. A technician flagged the partial fingerprint, noting that modern enhancement software might be able to pull more detail than was possible in 2005. It wasn't a breakthrough. Not yet. Just a possibility. But cold cases survive on possibilities. The print was reprocessed, cleaned, enhanced, fed back into a system that had grown exponentially in 19 years. Millions more records, better algorithms, fewer blind spots. When the match alert came back, it didn't light up the room. It didn't trigger alarms. It appeared on a screen, quietly, like a whisper that had finally found a throat. A name, not someone new. Someone who had brushed the edge of the case years ago and walked away untouched. The suspect was older now, thinner, living 2 counties over. No violent record that stood out. Married, employed, the kind of man who waved at neighbors. The kind of man no one remembers seeing for the first time. Detectives stared at the screen longer than they needed to. Cold cases teach you to distrust hope. They had been here before, convinced, then disappointed. But this felt different. This had weight. They reopened the file officially, pulling it from the shelf with a care that bordered on superstition. Every page was reread. Every timeline re-examined. Small inconsistencies that once seemed irrelevant now glowed faintly with meaning. The short phone call, the location of the car, the suspect's movements that night, previously dismissed as unremarkable. Nothing screamed guilt. That was the problem. The case had never screamed. It had only whispered patiently for nearly 2 decades. And somewhere in Texas, a man who thought he had outlived the worst night of his life was about to learn that time doesn't erase everything. Sometimes it just waits. The detectives didn't rush it. Cold cases punish impatience. They knew the difference between a match and a conviction, between a name on a screen and a truth that could survive daylight. So they moved slowly, deliberately, as if the past itself might shatter if handled too roughly. The suspect's name stayed off paper at first, spoken only in closed rooms, lowered voices, the way people talk about things they don't yet trust. He had been interviewed once, briefly, in 2005. A routine check, a forgettable conversation. At the time, nothing stuck. Now, every word from that old transcript felt heavier, like it had been waiting for gravity to return. They rebuilt the night from scratch. Not the version that had calcified over years of retelling, but the raw sequence of hours as they might have actually unfolded. 9 p.m. The victim finishing her shift, co-workers waving goodbye. 10:40 p.m. Her car pulling out of the parking lot. 10:57 p.m. Convenience store lights washing her face in fluorescent white. 11:02 p.m. The phone call. Less than 60 seconds. Investigators replayed that detail again and again. Who calls just to hang up? Who needs only a minute? They pulled phone records, not just hers, but everyone connected to her orbit, mapping calls like veins. The suspect's number appeared nearby, not overlapping, but close enough to raise eyebrows. Coincidence, maybe. Cold cases are built on maybes. They drove the route themselves, late at night, windows down, radios off. They wanted to feel the road the way she had felt it. The long stretches of darkness broken by pools of artificial light. County Road 114 wasn't a place you ended up by accident, but it wasn't isolated enough to guarantee privacy either. That tension mattered. It suggested hesitation. A stop that wasn't planned. A conversation that went wrong before it could finish. The car's position, angled, not parked, hinted at interruption, as if she'd meant to leave quickly and never got the chance. The suspect's life in 2005 came back into focus under the harsh light of hindsight. He'd worked odd hours. He'd owned a truck similar to one mentioned in an early tip, a detail dismissed at the time because half the county drove something similar. He'd known the area well, too well. His alibi rested on routine, the most fragile kind. I was home. I went to bed early. It was just a normal night. Normal again, that dangerous word, resurfacing like a bad habit. Detectives re-interviewed old witnesses, their approach careful, almost gentle. People don't like being reminded of what they forgot. Some doors closed immediately. Others opened just enough to let in uncertainty. A former co-worker hesitated, then admitted something they'd never mentioned before. The victim had seemed distracted in the weeks leading up to her death, nervous, checking her phone more than usual, saying someone kept showing up where they shouldn't. At the time, it sounded like stress. Now it sounded like a warning delivered too softly to hear. They tracked down the clerk from the convenience store, older now, slower, but still sharp. The footage was long gone, erased, recorded over, lost to time. Memory was all that remained. He remembered her because she'd smiled. He remembered a man behind her in line, impatient, shifting his weight. Did he remember the face? No, just the feeling. The sense that something about him didn't fit. Feelings don't hold up in court, but they linger in the room when detectives talk late into the night. The fingerprint match sat at the center of everything, a quiet accusation. Partial prints are tricky. Defense attorneys love them. But technology had done what it does best. It had narrowed the universe. The print didn't just suggest the suspect had touched the car. It suggested when. The location, inside the driver's door, near the handle, implied familiarity or urgency. This wasn't a casual brush in a crowded space. This was contact at a moment that mattered. They needed more. Cold cases don't reopen on fingerprints alone. They need pressure. They need leverage. They started looking for patterns not just in the suspect's past, but in the gaps. Had there been other incidents? Other women stopped late at night? Other unexplained encounters that never became reports? They combed through old police logs, scanning for anything that felt unfinished. A welfare check here, a suspicious vehicle there. Nothing rose to the level of a crime, but together they formed a shadowy outline. Presence without a name. When they finally decided to bring the suspect in, they did it quietly. No lights, no sirens. A knock on the door that sounded like any other knock. He answered in slippers, confusion flickering across his face. then smoothing out into something practiced. He agreed to talk. Most people do. Innocent or guilty, they believe cooperation will save them. They don't realize the room has already been decided. The interview room hadn't changed much since 2005. Same scuffed table. Same clock ticking too loudly. The detectives let the silence work first. Silence makes people fill it. He talked about his life now, his job, his family. The years between then and now that had nothing to do with the woman whose name hovered unspoken between them. When they shifted the conversation backward, he followed, cautious but willing. Yes, he remembered being questioned back then. No, he didn't remember much about her. Yes, he knew the road. Everyone did. They placed the enhanced fingerprint photo on the table without explanation. Let it sit there like an unanswered question. His eyes flicked to it, then away. A small movement. Almost nothing. Cold cases train you to notice almost nothing. He asked what it was. They told him. He laughed, a quick sound. Too quick. Said it must be a mistake. Said he'd never been in her car. Said technology gets things wrong all the time. They didn't argue. They didn't accuse. They asked him to explain how his print got there. He couldn't. Not really. Stories shifted. Maybe he'd leaned in once. Maybe he'd helped someone with car trouble. Maybe he'd shaken hands with someone who'd been inside the car. Each explanation arrived too late, layered over the last like fresh paint on rot. His confidence thinned. The room grew heavier. When they mentioned the phone call, the short one, the timing, his jaw tightened. He said he didn't remember calling her. Records suggested otherwise, though not conclusively. Again, maybe. Again, coincidence. Cold cases live in that space, balanced on the edge of doubt. But doubt accumulates. It stacks up, piece by piece, until the weight becomes hard to ignore. They let him go that night. That was the part that scared him most. Innocent people leave interviews relieved. Guilty ones leave unsettled. He returned home carrying the quiet knowledge that something long buried had shifted. Detectives watched him go, already planning their next move. They had enough now to wake the case fully, to bring prosecutors into the light, to ask a question the town had learned not to ask anymore. What if this was finally it? Outside, the Texas night looked much the same as it had in 2005. Roads empty, lights buzzing, silence pressing in. But somewhere beneath that stillness, the past was moving again, stretching, testing its chains. And for the first time in 19 years, the case wasn't cold. It was breathing. Breathing didn't mean alive. It meant restless. The case woke up angry, shaking off years of dust, demanding attention it had been denied. Inside the department, whispers turned into meetings. Meetings turned into strategy. Prosecutors were briefed with the careful language of people who know how fragile old cases are. Nothing was promised. Everything was conditional. The question wasn't whether they believed the suspect could be guilty. The question was whether they could prove it without tearing the past apart in the process. They went back to the evidence room like archaeologists returning to a dig they'd once abandoned. Boxes were reopened, seals broken, gloves pulled tight. Every item was handled as if it might speak if given the chance. Fibers from the victim's clothing were re-examined under newer microscopes. Soil samples from the scene were compared against locations tied to the suspect's past addresses. Most of it led nowhere. Cold cases teach patience through disappointment. But occasionally, the absence of a result is a result in itself. Some fibers didn't match anything from the scene. Some grains of dirt didn't belong where they were found. Small inconsistencies, faint but persistent. The autopsy report was revisited next, its language parsed line by line. Back in 2005, technology had limits. Now, those limits had moved. The medical examiner consulted with specialists, reinterpreting findings that once seemed inconclusive. Subtle trauma, once attributed to the chaos of discovery, now suggested restraint, pressure, control. Not rage, not panic, but intent. The kind that doesn't leave obvious marks because it doesn't need to. That shift mattered. It reframed the crime not as an explosion, but as a deliberate act. Meanwhile, Detectives widened their net around the suspect's life, both past and present. They spoke to ex-partners who hadn't been contacted before, people who drifted out of his orbit long before the murder but still carried impressions that never fully faded. One described him as quiet, attentive, the kind of man who listened closely. Another hesitated, then admitted he didn't like being told no. The comments were vague, subjective, the kind defense attorneys shred. But taken together, they painted a picture that felt uncomfortably familiar to anyone who had worked violent crime long enough. Financial records were pulled. Nothing dramatic. No sudden withdrawals. No suspicious purchases. But cell tower data, once too crude to be useful, now offered something better than nothing. His phone had been in the general area that night. Not precise. Not damning. Just close. Again, maybe. Again, coincidence. The defense of every ghost. The victim's family was informed carefully, their hope handled like something breakable. They had lived with absence for nearly 2 decades. Reopening the case didn't feel like relief, felt like risk. What if this led nowhere to? What if the wound was reopened only to be stitched shut again, crooked and painful? They agreed to cooperate anyway. Families always do. They don't get the luxury of skepticism. Detectives asked questions they'd asked before, but this time they listened differently. They weren't hunting for new facts so much as new meaning. A comment about a disagreement. A memory of fear dismissed as stress. A name mentioned once and never followed up. The suspect's name surfaced again, lightly, like a ripple that refused to flatten. The family hadn't thought much of him back then. Now they wondered how they ever hadn't. Pressure built quietly. The suspect noticed it in small ways. A patrol car lingering too long on his street. A coworker asking if everything was okay. He didn't panic. Panic draws attention. Instead, he adjusted, changed routines, became careful. People who think they've gotten away with something for long enough start to believe they always will. But when the past reaches out, it does so clumsily, bumping into the present in ways that can't be ignored. Investigators decided it was time to test him again, not with accusations but with proximity. They requested a voluntary DNA sample, framed it as routine, elimination, a formality. He declined, politely, firmly, perfectly within his rights. But refusal has a sound to it, a particular pitch detectives recognize. It's the sound of someone choosing risk over certainty. That refusal became leverage. Not legal leverage, psychological leverage. They brought him in again weeks later, armed with more context, more patience. This time, the conversation was different. They talked about the victim, not the crime. About who she was. About her habits. About the road she drove that night. They watched his reactions closely. His face stayed composed, but his breathing changed. Slightly faster when they mentioned the location. Slightly slower when they changed subjects. The body keeps records the mind pretends not to. They asked him again about the fingerprint. Again he denied any contact. They showed him how the print had been enhanced, how technology had filled in gaps time couldn't erase. He leaned back, crossing his arms, a defensive posture he hadn't used before. He said he didn't trust machines. Said people put too much faith in computers. It was a strange argument coming from a man who lived in a world built on them. Outside the room, detectives compared notes. No confession. No breakdown. But something was cracking. Not loudly. Internally. They could feel it. Cold cases don't collapse. They fracture slowly, along lines you can't always see. Then came the call no one expected. A former acquaintance of the suspect, someone who had moved out of state years earlier, reached out after seeing a brief news mention about the reopened investigation. At first, they said they didn't know why they were calling. Just a feeling. Just something they'd never been able to shake. Over time, words came easier. A memory surfaced of a late-night conversation years ago. The suspect drunk, angry, talking about a woman who had pushed too far. No names. No specifics. Just bitterness, raw and unresolved. At the time, it sounded like venting. Now it sounded like rehearsal. The statement wasn't enough on its own. It was hearsay, fragile, easily attacked. But it joined the others, aligning with them in a way that felt deliberate. Patterns began to form where once there had only been noise. The prosecutor reviewed the growing file, weighing risk against obligation. Cold cases carry a special burden. You don't get many shots. You don't get to miss. When the decision came to seek an arrest warrant, it didn't arrive with celebration. It arrived with silence, signatures, a final review of probable cause that read like a story stitched together from fragments of different lives. Fingerprint evidence, cell data, behavioral analysis, witness statements old and new, none of it perfect, all of it pointing in the same direction. The warrant was approved just after dawn. The timing felt intentional, though no one said why. Morning arrests have a way of cutting through defenses built overnight. Officers were dispatched. The suspect was at home. He answered the door in daylight this time, blinking, confused, recognition dawning too late. When they told him he was under arrest for a murder committed in 2005, the words seemed to pass through him without landing. He didn't resist. He didn't ask questions. He just nodded once, as if confirming something he'd always known. As they led him away, neighbors watched from behind curtains, the way people do when a quiet street suddenly becomes news. Somewhere, the road where the body was found remained unchanged, indifferent to the shift it had triggered. And inside the department, the case that had slept for 19 years was no longer just breathing. It had teeth. The booking photo froze him in a way memory never had. The camera stripped away the years he'd hidden behind routine, left him staring straight ahead, jaw set, eyes glassy with something between disbelief and calculation. His name hit the system, and with it, the town exhaled a breath it didn't know it had been holding. Arrested. Charged. The words traveled fast, faster than facts ever do, ricocheting through group chats and morning radio like sparks. People wanted resolution. They wanted the story to end cleanly. Cold cases don't do clean. Morning arrived without ceremony. No thunder. No omen. Just light seeping through courtroom windows that had witnessed thousands of smaller truths and lies. The suspect was brought in wearing the same expression he'd practiced for weeks. Neutral, contained, carefully empty. He took his seat beside counsel, hands folded, eyes forward. The jury wasn't there yet. This was still about rules, about what the story was allowed to be before anyone heard it. The defense struck first. Motions to exclude. Motions to dismiss. They argued decay, of memory, of evidence, of fairness. They said the case was a collage built long after the moment had passed, assembled by people who wanted closure more than accuracy. They pointed at the fingerprint and called it incomplete. They pointed at witnesses and called them unreliable. They pointed at time itself and called it the prosecution's greatest accomplice. The prosecutor listened, pen still, face unreadable. When it was their turn, they didn't raise their voice. They didn't dramatize. They talked about persistence, about technology catching up with truth, about how absence isn't innocence. They framed the case not as a resurrection, but as a continuation, a thread never cut, only tangled. The judge weighed each argument carefully, aware that every decision would tilt the scales. In the end, the motions were denied. Not all, not cleanly, but enough. Word spread fast. The trial would proceed. Jury selection was a study in caution. Potential jurors were asked what they remembered, what they'd heard, what they believed about old cases coming back to life. Some admitted bias and were excused. Others claimed neutrality with a confidence that suggested otherwise. 12 were chosen. Ordinary people tasked with measuring an extraordinary amount of doubt. Opening statements began with a familiar rhythm. The prosecution told a story of patience and convergence, of small facts aligning over time. They described a woman who had trusted the wrong person, a night that spiraled, a truth delayed but not denied. The defense countered with warnings about tunnel vision, about coincidence mistaken for causation, about a man being judged not for what he did, but for what the past couldn't explain. Witnesses took the stand one by one. Detectives spoke about the original investigation, their voices carrying the weight of hindsight. They admitted mistakes, gaps, missed opportunities. The jury listened, faces unreadable. The fingerprint expert followed, explaining enhancement techniques in careful technical language, careful not to oversell. The print, they said, was consistent. Not perfect, consistent. That word landed softly, but it stayed. The convenience store clerk testified next, older now, voice wavering as he described a night he hadn't thought about in years until someone asked him to. He admitted he couldn't be sure. He admitted memory fades, but he held onto the feeling, the sense of unease. The defense seized on that, dismantling it piece by piece. Feelings aren't facts. The jury nodded. Feelings aren't facts. The former acquaintance who'd called in took the stand reluctantly. They spoke about the conversation they'd overheard years ago, the bitterness, the tone. Under cross-examination, their certainty eroded. Had the suspect named the victim? No. Had he described a crime? No. Then how could they be sure it mattered? The witness faltered. They couldn't. Not for certain. The defense smiled. Doubt was doing its work. The key from the storage unit sparked the most visible reaction. The prosecution presented it carefully, emphasizing context without claiming ownership. The defense objected loudly, framing it as a coincidence elevated to evidence. The judge allowed it in with limitations. The jury stared at the small, ordinary object as if it might speak on its own. Didn't. Throughout it all, the suspect sat still. He watched. He listened. When his own statements were introduced, those fragments, those careful admissions, his jaw tightened. The prosecution highlighted inconsistencies, the evolution of his story. The defense reframed them as the natural result of pressure and fear. The truth hovered somewhere between. When it came time for him to decide whether to testify, the courtroom held its breath. He chose not to. The decision was strategic, expected, devastating in its own quiet way. Juries want to hear from the person at the center of the storm. Silence can feel like absence. Absence can feel like guilt. Closing arguments drew the lines sharply. The prosecution spoke of convergence again, of how no single piece proved the case, but how together they formed a picture too complete to ignore. The defense reminded the jury of the standard. Beyond a reasonable doubt. Not beyond suspicion. Not beyond coincidence. Beyond doubt. They warned that once you convict a man on fragments, you teach the system it doesn't need certainty anymore. Deliberations began. Hours passed. Then a full day. The jury asked questions, requested exhibits, replayed testimony. The victim's family waited in a small room, hands clasped, hearts heavy with memories they'd learned to carry quietly. The suspect waited in a holding cell, staring at a wall that offered no answers. When the jury returned, the room filled slowly. Everyone stood. The foreperson's voice trembled slightly as they spoke. The verdict was read aloud, each word falling into the space between belief and disbelief. Guilty on some counts, not guilty on others. Partial victory, partial failure. A conclusion that satisfied no one completely. Sentencing was scheduled. Appeals were promised. The headlines shifted, hedging their language now, trading certainty for complexity. Cold case partially resolved. Mixed verdict in 2005 murder. The town absorbed the news unevenly. Some felt justice had finally arrived. Others felt something essential had slipped away. As the courtroom emptied, detectives lingered, exchanging looks that carried 19 years of weight. They had done what they could with what they had. The case was no longer cold. But it wasn't closed either. It had become something else. A reminder that time doesn't just bury truth. It reshapes it. Outside, traffic moved as usual. The road where it all began remained just another road. But for those who knew the story, who had lived inside it for nearly 2 decades, nothing about it would ever feel ordinary again. Sentencing did not arrive with finality. It arrived like weather, predictable, unavoidable, still capable of changing direction at the last moment. The courtroom filled again, familiar faces returning to the same wooden benches, carrying new expectations layered over old wounds. The suspect stood when told, shoulders squared, expression carefully neutral. The judge spoke in measured tones about accountability, about harm that echoes forward, about a life taken and lives altered in its wake. Numbers followed. Years. Conditions. Words designed to translate moral weight into calendar time. When it was over, nothing felt lighter. Outside the courthouse, microphones waited. Reporters asked if justice had been served. The victim's family hesitated before answering. Justice is a dangerous word when it's been delayed for 19 years. They spoke instead about relief mixed with exhaustion, about a chapter ending without erasing the rest of the book. Their voices shook, not with triumph, but with the strain of finally setting something down. The defense filed appeals almost immediately. Procedural errors, evidentiary challenges. The fingerprint again. Always the fingerprint. Cold cases don't end at verdicts. They echo through motions and briefs and late-night strategy sessions. Prosecutors prepared to defend what they built, knowing that time, once their enemy, was now something else entirely. Appeals take years. Years are familiar territory. As the legal machinery turned, detectives returned to the question that never quite went away. Was this everything? Partial verdicts have a way of leaving doors ajar. They revisited evidence not for court, but for themselves, replaying interviews, rewalking timelines, listening again to the pauses in recordings. Sometimes, certainty doesn't arrive with a gavel. Sometimes it arrives quietly, too late to matter legally but impossible to ignore personally. One detail kept resurfacing. The missing keys. They had become symbolic over the years, a small absence that represented all the others. The key found in the storage unit had come close, but not close enough. Investigators wondered where the rest might be, if they still existed at all. Keys are meant to open things. In this case, they had locked the truth away. A tip came in months after sentencing, the kind that would have been dismissed outright before the arrest. A man claimed he'd found a set of old car keys while clearing land near a property the suspect had once visited frequently. No proof. No context. Just rusted metal and fading plastic. Detectives went anyway. Cold cases teach you never to ignore coincidence twice. The keys were sent for analysis. No usable DNA. No definitive link. But the make matched. Again, maybe. Again, implication without confirmation. The pattern repeated, relentless. Each discovery added weight without resolution. Like stones piling up on a grave no one could quite locate. The suspect, now inmate, adapted to routine quickly. Prison does that. Structure replaces freedom, and some men find comfort in that exchange. He kept his head down, spoke little. When asked about the case by counselors or guards, he deflected. Said the past was complicated. Said people see what they want to see. He filed his appeals with the same calm he'd used in interviews, trusting process over confession. Years passed. Not 19 this time. Just enough for the edges of the case to dull again in public memory. The headlines faded. New crimes took their place. The phrase cold case drifted back toward abstraction. But for those closest to it, the story kept moving quietly, in footnotes and filings and late-night doubts. One of the original detectives retired. On his last day, he stood alone in the evidence room, looking at the empty space where the box had once sat. He thought about the night he'd first driven down County Road 114, the way the headlights had cut through darkness that felt too thick. He wondered if they'd gotten it right. Cold cases don't grant certainty easily. They teach you to live with the question. The victim's family marked another anniversary. This time, they visited the road together, standing where the car had been found. The surroundings had changed again, new signs, new fences, but the air felt the same. They spoke her name out loud, not for cameras, not for court, but for themselves. Closure isn't a door that closes. It's a weight you learn to carry differently. Somewhere, a file was updated, stamped, archived again, now marked resolved with an asterisk no one could see. The system needs labels. Life rarely fits them. The case had been cracked, yes, but not cleanly. Truth had surfaced, but not all of it. What remained lived on in the spaces between verdict and doubt, between memory and proof. And in Texas, under the same wide sky that had watched everything unfold, the road stayed quiet, holding its secrets the way it always had, patient, indifferent, waiting for anyone who believed time alone could make them disappear. The appeal moved slowly, as appeals always do, measured not in emotion but in pages. Briefs thick with citations replaced witness voices. Arguments became abstract, reduced to standards and thresholds, the human cost compressed into footnotes. For the court, it was a matter of process. For everyone else, it was a reopening of a wound that had never truly closed. Cold cases don't respect timelines. They resurface when they choose. The defense argued contamination again, pointing to evidence handled across decades, to hands and rooms and protocols that had changed. They questioned the enhancement software, suggesting it created clarity where none existed. The prosecution countered with documentation, with logs and testimony about chain of custody. They emphasized consistency, not perfection. The appellate judges listened without expression. They had heard versions of this before. Old cases live and die on margins. While the legal battle played out, a journalist began digging deeper, dissatisfied with the headlines that had rushed to certainty and then retreated. He requested records, interviewed retired officers, spoke to neighbors who had never been quoted. He wasn't looking for scandal. He was looking for texture. Cold cases flatten stories. He wanted to give this one its depth back. In the process, he uncovered something small but unsettling. A report from 2005, barely referenced, involving a traffic stop near County Road 114 the same night as the murder. The driver had been let go with a warning. The officer noted nothing unusual beyond nervousness. The name wasn't the suspect's. That was the problem. Or the opportunity. The journalist published the detail cautiously, framing it as context rather than accusation. Still, it stirred the surface. Detectives read the article with mixed feelings. On one hand, it threatened to complicate a case already balanced on a knife's edge. On the other, it reminded them of the blind spots that time creates. They pulled the report, reviewed it, traced the driver's history. Nothing connected. Another thread that frayed on contact. Another reminder that coincidence thrives in the dark. Inside the prison, the suspect followed the appeal updates through filtered channels. He marked time by court dates and holidays, by the rhythm of institutional life. When his appeal was partially denied, some arguments rejected, others allowed to proceed, he reacted with the same measured calm he'd shown from the beginning. Hope, like guilt, can be hidden behind discipline. The victim's family received the news in fragments, translated by attorneys who tried to manage expectations. Partial denials meant nothing was over. Nothing ever is. They learned the language of the system the hard way, discovering how words like remand and review could stretch years thin. Still, they attended hearings when they could, sitting quietly, faces familiar to a room that had seen them age in place. A new development arrived not from court, but from technology again. A cold case unit in another county reached out after reprocessing evidence from an unrelated investigation. A fingerprint there, partial, degraded, showed similarities to the suspect's print. Not a match strong enough to charge. Strong enough to notice. The incident had involved a late-night encounter. No injuries. No report filed at the time. It had been dismissed as nothing. Nothing again. The information was shared, evaluated, ultimately filed away. Couldn't be used. But it shifted something intangible. Pattern is persuasive, even when it's inadmissible. Detectives felt the shape of the past becoming clearer, even as the law refused to acknowledge it. Truth and proof don't always travel together. The appellate court eventually ruled. The conviction would stand. Some evidentiary concerns were noted, some procedures criticized, but not enough to overturn the outcome. The decision arrived without drama. A document uploaded quietly. Its impact felt unevenly. For the prosecution, it was validation. For the defense, a narrowing of options. For the family, a cautious exhale. The journalist published a follow-up, this time more reflective, exploring the cost of time on justice. He wrote about the road, the evidence room, the people who had carried the case forward and those who hadn't lived to see it change. He didn't declare certainty. He didn't need to. The story's power lay in its unresolved edges. Years later, a young detective assigned to review old files stumbled across the case while training. To her, it was history. To her mentors, it was muscle memory. They told her about patience, about humility, about the danger of believing a case is ever truly finished. Cold cases, they said, don't end. They recede. On an ordinary evening, traffic flowed along County Road 114, headlights cutting clean lines through the dark. Drivers passed without slowing, unaware of the weight beneath their tires. Somewhere, a set of keys lay buried or rusted away, no longer able to open anything. And the case, cracked but not healed, lingered in the collective consciousness like a low hum, quiet, persistent, impossible to ignore if you know how to listen. Time softened the edges, but it didn't erase the shape. The case slipped into a strange middle state, no longer urgent, never truly settled. It lived in court databases and training manuals, in conversations that began with "remember that one?" and ended without answers. For the victim's family, it lived somewhere else entirely, in the daily arithmetic of loss, in anniversaries that still felt sharp, in moments when the world moved on without asking permission. The prison adjusted to the inmate the way it adjusts to everyone, by reducing him to a number and a routine. He learned when to speak and when silence was safer. He filed paperwork methodically, tracked deadlines, waited. The appeal having failed, the future narrowed into something predictable. He didn't talk about the case unless pressed, and even then, he framed it as misunderstanding, as a life interrupted by mistakes that weren't his. Some men rehearse innocence until it becomes reflex. A counselor noted his control, his refusal to engage emotionally with the offense. Lack of insight, the report said. The phrase followed him through reviews, neutral but heavy. Insight is what institutions want. It's what cold cases rarely get. Outside, the journalist's articles were archived, read mostly by students and armchair investigators who liked to revisit old mysteries. Online forums debated the evidence with the confidence of distance. Some were certain the right man was convicted. Others weren't. Cold cases breed communities that survive on doubt. The arguments repeated themselves, looping endlessly, fueled by fragments and belief. One post, buried deep in a thread, caught a retired detective's eye. It mentioned a detail wrong in a way that felt deliberate. The poster corrected a minor timeline error with unusual precision, citing a time no official source had ever published. The detective hesitated, then reached out. The account went silent. The post was deleted. Nothing to pursue. Still, the unease lingered. Knowledge has a way of leaking. The victim's sibling moved away, seeking distance from a town that had become synonymous with a single night. Distance helped, but only partially. Trauma travels well. On a visit back, they drove County Road 114 alone. Windows down, radio off, letting memory rush in unfiltered. The road looked smaller than it had in their imagination, less dramatic, more ordinary. That ordinariness felt like betrayal. A conference on cold case methodology invited one of the prosecutors to speak. She talked about patience, about collaboration, about respecting uncertainty. She used the case as an example without naming it, describing the balance between technological promise and human limitation. In the audience, younger investigators took notes, eager for tools. Older ones listened for caution. Technology marched on. New forensic techniques emerged, offering sharper resolution, deeper insight. The evidence from the case was reevaluated yet again, this time by a research lab testing advanced degradation analysis. The results were consistent with prior conclusions. Consistent again. Not revelatory. Progress doesn't always deliver miracles. A rumor surfaced briefly, then died about another potential suspect, someone who had left the state years earlier. Amateur sleuths latched onto it, spinning theories. Authorities checked, quietly. Nothing connected. The noise faded. Cold cases attract echoes. Most of them are empty. Inside the department, the file was moved to a different shelf, one labeled for cases used in training. It sat alongside others like it, stories of persistence and imperfection. New recruits read it and asked questions. Could they have done more? Could they have done better? The answers were always complicated. They still are. One night, long after midnight, a detective who'd worked the case from the beginning found himself awake, scrolling through old notes on a tablet. He stopped at a sentence he'd written years earlier, frustrated, half angry. Something's missing. At the time, it had been a complaint. Now it felt like a thesis. Something is always missing. That doesn't mean nothing happened. It means the past rarely hands itself over intact. The town continued to grow, to change, to forget in pieces. New families moved in, unaware of the story embedded in their commute. The memorial plaque placed near the road weathered quietly, its inscription still legible to those who looked closely. Most didn't. Cold cases don't haunt everyone equally. They choose their witnesses carefully. They linger with those who know the weight of unanswered questions, who understand that justice isn't a moment but a process that never fully concludes. This one remained what it had always been. A line drawn through time, imperfect, persistent, refusing to disappear. The years stacked quietly after that, indistinguishable at first, then heavy with repetition. What once felt immediate became procedural. The case name appeared less often in emails, then not at all. But absence was not resolution. It was simply space. Space for doubt to breathe, space for memory to warp. Parole review came and went. The inmate prepared for it with the same discipline he brought to everything else. Statements were written, behavior reports compiled. He spoke of growth without admitting guilt, of responsibility without confession. The board listened, impassive. Parole was denied. Not because of certainty, but because of ambiguity. Ambiguity makes institutions cautious. He returned to his cell with the same measured steps, the same controlled silence. Across the state, another cold case unit began experimenting with cross-jurisdictional pattern mapping, feeding decades of partial data into systems designed to detect behavioral overlap rather than identity. The goal wasn't charges. It was understanding. One profile surfaced repeatedly in simulations. A man comfortable in liminal spaces, late hours, transitional roads. The profile overlapped with the suspect's known history. Not enough to act. Enough to notice. Again, the same refrain. Enough. A former juror from the trial struggled with the verdict long after it was read. They'd voted guilty on the count that mattered most, convinced by accumulation rather than any single fact. Over time, that certainty thinned. They replayed testimony in their mind, wondering if they'd mistaken coherence for truth. Cold cases don't end for jurors when the trial does. They end when memory finally loosens its grip. That can take years. The journalist received an anonymous envelope one afternoon. Inside, photocopies of handwritten notes dated years before the arrest. The handwriting was uneven, hurried, the content vague. Mentions of anger, of control, of that road. No names, no signatures. The journalist verified the paper's age, but couldn't authenticate the author. Publishing it would raise more questions than it answered. He locked it away instead, another artifact in a career built on restraint. The victim's family learned of the envelope indirectly, through whispers. For a moment, hope flared again, unwanted and sharp. They reached out to authorities who reviewed the materials carefully and concluded what they always did. Inconclusive. The family thanked them anyway. Gratitude had become reflex. Inside the prison, the inmate aged, hair thinned, joints stiffened, control softened into routine. Guards noticed he avoided news now, no longer tracking developments obsessively. Either resignation had settled in or certainty had. It was impossible to tell which was more dangerous. A training seminar invited the retired detective to speak. He stood before a room of younger officers and told them about the case without embellishment. He talked about what they'd done right, what they'd missed, and what they would never know. Someone asked him if he believed they got the right man. He paused longer than expected before answering. He said belief wasn't the metric. Responsibility was. The room went quiet. Late one night, a maintenance crew repairing drainage near County Road 114 unearthed debris from years past. Nothing remarkable. Bottles, scrap metal, soil displaced and replaced again and again. The crew worked through it methodically, unaware of the history beneath their boots. No discoveries were reported. The road kept its silence. The case appeared once more in public consciousness when a documentary series revisited unsolved and partially solved crimes. Producers debated including it. In the end, they did, framing it not as an answer but as a study in endurance. Viewers argued online as they always do. Some praised the conviction. Others questioned it. The discourse was loud, fleeting, and gone within weeks. What remained were the people who couldn't let go. Not because they wanted certainty, but because uncertainty had become part of their internal landscape. Detectives, family, even the accused. Cold cases reshape everyone they touch. In the end, the case existed in fragments scattered across time. A fingerprint, a road, a night, a verdict with edges worn thin by years of doubt. It had been cracked, yes, but cracked like ice under pressure, not like a puzzle solved cleanly. The fractures were still visible, still dangerous. And somewhere between memory and proof, between silence and noise, the truth waited. Not hidden, not revealed, just unfinished. By the time the 20th anniversary approached, the case had become a reference point rather than a headline. It was cited in lectures, footnoted in journals, invoked whenever someone needed an example of how time bends justice without breaking it completely. The date circled quietly on calendars, acknowledged by those who remembered and ignored by those who didn't. Anniversaries don't demand attention. They wait to see who still feels them. The victim's family marked the day privately. No cameras, no statements. They gathered in a small living room, photos spread across a table like anchors. They talked about who she would have been now, the version of her life that never got the chance to exist. That imagined future had become as real as the past, another loss layered on top of the first. When they finished, they folded the photos away carefully, as if handling something fragile. Inside the prison, the date passed like any other. Count. Meal. Count again. The inmate noticed it only when a letter arrived, forwarded late, postmarked weeks earlier. No message inside, just a blank page. He stared at it longer than expected, then folded it once and placed it in a drawer. Silence can be louder than accusation. A Lowell Review article dissected the case that year, focusing on the use of partial forensic evidence in long-delayed prosecutions. The author praised caution, criticized overconfidence, and concluded without conclusion. The piece circulated among attorneys and judges, sparking debate that stayed safely theoretical. The people at the center of the case were not invited into that discussion. They rarely are. A new district attorney took office, promising transparency and reform. As part of an internal review, older convictions were audited for integrity. The case surfaced again, examined by people who hadn't lived inside it. Fresh eyes noticed familiar things, strengths, weaknesses. The conclusion mirrored every other review before it. The case held. Barely. Enough. One reviewer wrote a note in the margin of the file, more personal than professional. This one will never rest. It wasn't meant for the record. It stayed there anyway. The journalist received permission to access sealed portions of the file for a follow-up, years after his first articles. He read through transcripts and memos late into the night, tracing the evolution of certainty. What struck him wasn't the evidence, but the restraint. The number of times investigators chose not to speculate, not to push beyond what they could support. It wasn't a story of excess. It was a story of limits. He wondered if the public understood the difference. He interviewed the retired detective again, now slower, more reflective. They talked about regret. Not dramatic regret, but the quiet kind that settles into habits. The detective admitted there were nights he still thought about the missing pieces, about whether another question, asked another way, might have shifted everything. He said cold cases don't haunt you with what you did wrong. They haunt you with what you never got the chance to do. In a classroom miles away, a student watched the documentary episode and decided to pursue forensic science. The case, incomplete and unresolved in places, had sparked curiosity rather than fear. This, too, was a consequence. Cold cases create ripples you can't measure. The road remained unchanged, resurfaced once, repainted, its past paved over without ceremony. Drivers passed, tires humming, unaware of the weight carried beneath layers of asphalt. No marker indicated where to slow down. No sign warned of history. The land absorbed everything evenly. As the year ended, the inmate filed one final motion, thin and unlikely. It was denied quickly, without comment. The system had said all it was going to say. Whatever truth remained would have to exist outside its language. Cold cases don't fade out. They dim. They recede into a half-light where certainty and doubt coexist without resolution. This one had traveled that path fully, from shock to silence, from silence back to noise, and then into something quieter and heavier. It had been cracked, yes, but not opened. The fracture remained, a visible line through time, reminding anyone who looked closely that some stories don't end. They settle, and in settling, they continue to shape the ground beneath them, long after the headlines stop moving. There is a moment, long after the last filing and the final denial, when a case stops belonging to the system and starts belonging to memory. No courtroom holds it anymore. No database can close it. It drifts instead through people, attaching itself to thoughts that arrive uninvited, to roads driven without intention, to nights when silence feels heavier than noise. This was always that kind of case. The victim's name is spoken less often now, but not forgotten. It appears in family stories told to children who never met her, described through gestures and laughter rather than photographs. She becomes a presence defined by who she was, not how she died. This is a quiet victory, fragile and hard one. Cold cases take many things. They don't get to take everything. The man convicted in her death grows older behind walls that measure time differently. He reads. He waits. He learns which memories to revisit and which to keep buried. When asked, years later, if he regrets anything, he speaks carefully, choosing words that reveal nothing and protect everything. Regret, like guilt, remains unclaimed. Some truths die of neglect. Others survive it. The detectives who carried the case forward scatter into different lives. Some retire. Some move on to other units, other crimes. Yet the case follows them, resurfacing in small ways, a lecture invitation, a question from a trainee, a stretch of road glimpsed in passing. They understand now that solving a case and finishing it are not the same thing. Resolution is a spectrum, not a destination. In the department archives, the file rests among others like it, a record of effort rather than certainty. Its pages are worn at the corners, handled more than most. Students study it. Analysts annotate it. Each generation adds its own margin notes, its own questions. The case evolves without changing its core, a paradox that defines cold cases everywhere. The community adapts as communities always do. New tragedies arrive. New headlines replace old ones. Memory becomes selective, shaped by convenience and distance. But there are still those who slow down on that road, who glance at the shoulder where the car once sat, who feel something tighten without knowing why. Places remember, even when people try not to. Late at night, when the sky stretches wide and empty over Texas, the story feels unfinished in a way that has nothing to do with courts or verdicts. It feels unfinished because human understanding is unfinished. Because no reconstruction can fully capture a moment when everything went wrong. Because time, for all its power, cannot restore what was taken. This case was called cracked. The word suggests force, a sudden break, a solution achieved through pressure. But cracks let things leak. Doubt, grief, questions that refuse to seal. What remains after 19 years, after trials and appeals and analysis, is not a neat answer but a lasting tension between what is known and what can never be known. That tension is the true legacy. It is what keeps the story alive long after it should have ended. It is what turns a night in 2005 into a line that stretches forward, touching lives that had nothing to do with it and everything to learn from it. Cold cases don't ask to be solved. They ask to be remembered honestly. And somewhere between the hum of passing cars and the quiet of an evidence room at rest, the case continues to exist, not as a headline, not as a verdict, but as an echo. An echo that reminds anyone willing to listen that some truths do not arrive whole, that some justice comes incomplete, and that the past, once disturbed, never fully goes back to sleep. Years later, when the case is mentioned at all, it's often as a sentence fragment, a clause in a longer discussion about persistence or technology or the patience of time. The headline survives longer than the details. Texas, 2005. Cold case. Cracked. Arrested after 19 years. The words line up neatly, as if order were ever the point. But behind that arrangement, the story still resists being filed away. On certain nights, the road feels louder than it should. Wind moves across it in uneven bursts, carrying dust, carrying the suggestion of motion without direction. Someone driving alone might turn the radio down without knowing why, listening instead to the empty stretch ahead. There is no reason to slow, nothing to see, and yet the body remembers what the mind does not. Places imprint themselves quietly. In the evidence room, the box is opened less frequently now. When it is, the smell of paper and time rises together. Gloves slide on. Items are checked, counted, returned to their places. The process is ritual more than necessity. Everything inside has already said all it's going to say. Still, no one rushes. Respect becomes a form of caution. The victim's family no longer waits for calls. The phone rings, and it means something else entirely. Life has reorganized itself around the absence, not the expectation of change. Grief, once sharp, has learned to speak in a lower register. It shows up in anniversaries forgotten and then remembered too late, in moments of joy that arrive carrying an unexpected shadow. This is what endurance looks like when it has nowhere left to go. The convicted man remains a fixed point in the narrative, defined by a verdict that answers some questions and leaves others untouched. He is referenced more than he is understood, speculated about, reduced. Time flattens people that way, turning complexity into silhouette. Whatever truth he carries stays with him, sealed behind routines and walls that do not ask for confession. For investigators who encounter the case in training, it reads like a warning wrapped in an achievement. Proof that patience can matter. Proof that certainty has edges. They study the timeline, the gaps, the decisions made under pressure, and those delayed by doubt. They are taught what worked, but they notice what didn't just as clearly. Cold cases teach by omission as much as example. The journalist eventually stops writing about it. There is nothing left he can add without repeating himself, and repetition feels dishonest. He keeps the notes anyway, stacked in a drawer, because throwing them out would feel like erasure. Some stories don't need a final paragraph. They need a place to rest. The community continues, reshaped by time rather than closure. New residents move in unaware of what once happened. Old residents carry it differently now, less as shock and more as texture, part of the landscape of memory that defines where they're from. The case becomes local history, then background, then something people vaguely recognize without recalling why. Cold cases promise resolution and deliver something else instead. Perspective, humility, the understanding that answers can arrive late and still not arrive whole. This one followed that rule precisely, offering enough to change lives and not enough to quiet every doubt. In the end, what lingers is not the crime itself but the space it carved out. The long corridor of years filled with questions, effort, and restraint. That corridor doesn't close when a suspect is named or a sentence is served. It remains, stretching behind and ahead, a reminder that time can expose truths without ever fully explaining them. And so the case remains where it has always been, balanced between past and present, solved and unsettled. A cold case by name and by nature, still breathing softly beneath the surface of everything that came after. In the end, the case does not end at all. It thins out, like a sound traveling farther than expected, growing quieter but never fully gone. There is no final frame to freeze on, no last sentence that seals meaning in place. What remains is accumulation, the weight of years stacked carefully on a single night that refused to stay in the past. The road is still there. Morning light washes over it without ceremony. Trucks pass. Tires hum. The moment that changed everything has no physical marker, no warning sign, no reason for a stranger to look twice. And yet the ground holds it. History has a way of staying put even when everything else moves on. Somewhere, a box of documents is shifted again, not because it needs to be, but because someone cannot quite leave it alone. A name catches the eye. A date lingers longer than it should. The file is closed once more, gently, with the understanding that closure is an action, not a result. The victim lives on in fragments, in stories retold with softened edges, in photographs that stop aging, in the silence that follows her name when it's spoken aloud. She is no longer defined by mystery alone. She is defined by memory, and memory resists finality. The man at the center of the verdict wakes up to another day shaped by decisions made long ago. Time presses forward, indifferent. Whatever truth he carries remains his alone now, insulated from consequence by repetition and routine. The system has finished asking its questions. Those who investigated carry the case differently than they once did. Not as urgency, not as obsession, but as reference. A reminder of what patience can yield and what it cannot. They know now that solving a case does not guarantee peace, only clarity, and sometimes not even that. Cold cases promise revelation, but they deliver reflection. They force a reckoning with limits, of evidence, of certainty, of human understanding. This one did exactly that, leaving behind a legacy measured not in answers but in impact. Long after the headlines fade and the footage stops replaying, the story continues its quiet work. It shapes how people think about justice, about time, about the spaces between facts where doubt lives comfortably. It becomes a lesson without a conclusion, because some stories are not meant to resolve cleanly. Some are meant to remain slightly open, a reminder that the past is never entirely past, and that even when a cold case is cracked, something inside it stays unbroken, waiting, watching, and refusing to disappear.